Okay, welcome friends to Terraverse TV. Today we have another go around with our special guest, Peter Danenberg from Google. We had him on a Terraverse salon a while back. You may remember that. And we got into AI deeply. He's one of the foremost, premier, knowledgeable persons in this area. We'll talk about his background a little bit. But before we get started, as always, I tell you, if you like the kind of content we put out, if you like the people that I bring in, please subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell for updates, and please give us your comments because Peter welcomes them. I welcome them. We'll try to respond, particularly if you say something nice. We like those better, right, Peter? So, okay, so Peter's bio, I got to tell you, it's going to take a little while to get through because he's probably one of the few what I would call Renaissance men in the world still. He has such a diverse, interesting background that I just want to read it because it's an amazing background. So Peter's a senior software engineer at Google. He's renowned for his contributions to AI and software engineering. Since he joined, I guess in 2016, he's played a pivotal role in developing Google's AI initiatives, particularly the Gemini projects, which we'll talk about. It's pioneering work, amazing work, which focuses on advanced large language models for enterprise applications, and they have a whole host of different applications that they're developing. So in his current role, he's responsible for user outreach and engagement for the Gemini AI project. He conducts weekly workshops at Google, attracting over 300 attendees, where he shares his insights and developments related to AI technologies. He's all over the place. He's all over the world. He's everywhere because they need him to sort of get the rest of the world engaged and sort of show how all of these products are going to be helpful to humanity. So before Google, he's been around. So Peter's been around. He's amassed extensive experience in software engineering and data infrastructure. He's been at various companies, TrueCar. He founded Brick Locus. He's been at Caris Life Sciences, Factual Inc., Genentech, Response Genetics, Novartis, CK12 Foundation, which I know a bit about, and Information Sciences Institute. So the guy has a deep, deep background. He didn't jump into AI in the last minute like a lot of people have. His academic background is amazing. So I want to read this because I don't get many like this, a few, but many. Okay. So he completed his coursework in philosophy at the University of Cambridge and in classics at the International Center for Hellenic and Mediterranean Studies. That is pretty impressive. That's a pretty diverse background. And then from philosophy and classics to go into philosophy, piano, German, the list of things that you have background in besides computer science is amazing. So this is a well-rounded individual. And if you're going to be in AI today, I think having the grounding that Peter has is very helpful because he's into ethics. He understands the human race. He understands philosophy. And I think it's really helpful rather than having a bunch of finance guys, right, jump in because it's a trade, right, for them. And I don't want it to be a trade. This is human capability. So having your background, Peter, has always been wonderful for me. So he's been everywhere. He does these meetups. He's done a bunch of series and talks with 50 Shades of Gemini, day trading with Gemini, playing with Gemma, coding with Gemini. He's all over the place. He does stuff at the MIT Imagination and Action events. He's in Silicon Valley. He's one of the highly sought after thought leaders in the space. We're so lucky to have him and in his busy schedule. So today we're going to cover a bunch of stuff. But first, I just want to make sure I want to thank Peter. Thank you for coming so much.
Oh, John, no, thanks for having me, honestly.
Sitting next to Peter's tough because he's a big dude on top of all that. He's kind of a big athlete, so on top of all the other stuff, professional athlete, throw that in there. He doesn't like to talk about his background. He's a very modest guy, but I don't mind bragging about him because I like hanging around with cool people. So Peter, before we get started, for the folks out there like me who love AI. We love the notion of AI. We've been following it a lot lately, more than ever. But it kind of crept up on most of us as something that we heard about, knew about, tons of movies about it, about taking over for humans. But all of a sudden in the last couple of years, it's like everywhere. It's in everything. Everybody's talking about it. Everyone has accepted it as the new thing. And most people have no idea what it is. So I thought it would be helpful to go over some of the different types of AI that we're talking about, like large language models and generative AI and machine learning. So would you cover a couple of those areas and just give people a sort of brief overview of what AI is from your perspective?
These large language models in particular, it's kind of funny because they're just these machines that generate tokens. That's all it comes down. And those tokens, by the way, they can be words, they can be music. What some people are doing now is they're generating things like even genomes, and that sort of thing. So anything that looks like language, these models can generate, really, and that's kind of what that's their specialty. But on top of that, they can, they can synthesize information. They can, this was a case actually. So, my folks, unfortunately, their place just burned down in the LA fires last week.
Tragic.
But here's the thing, this guy from State Farm came by a few years ago. He sold my dad an insurance policy with no fire coverage, and so it turns out that my folks now, they're sort of destitute, right? But if my dad at the time, if he'd had sort of an LLM, he could have just put it through Gemini or GPT, and maybe it would have broken it down and said, listen, in all the legalese, it turns out there's no fire coverage here. Be careful if you buy this thing. So, really, they're just these machines to kind of help us make sense of the world, especially when we're dealing with cases like, I don't know, legalese or, any of these large documents where it's beyond some of our capabilities to like parse and understand these things. It turns out these large language models are good at synthesizing that kind of information and breaking it down. So I guess on a practical level, that's kind of what it means to me. And really, people right now, they're trying to figure out how to make money with these things. And I heard some of the investors are getting a little bit restless on some sense, because right now, I think the most common use case is the chatbot, right? And that's kind of but I think where things are going are these so-called agents, and that's this kind of big thing coming. And, I remember about a year ago, this guy got in touch with me, and these agents were kind of on the horizon then. And he said, listen, is there any way I can write an agent that'll go into Tinder for me? And, when I land in San Francisco, it can negotiate sort of dinner for me at, 6 o'clock or whatever, right? And so there's this idea now that these models are like agents are going to be, working on our behalf in the world and negotiating with other people for things. And that's a little bit funny, right? Because that means that, let's say in the future, there's an army of these AI agents. Maybe you and I don't really get on the phone and talk. Maybe it's my AI agent talks to your AI agent. They come up with something, and then maybe they present us the deal, right? And that's at least, it seems like that's how people envision this kind of going a little bit,
Well, yeah. I mean, the law guys, the law business, they're calling them personal assistants or
right.
Legal assistants, and they're trying to push that as a concept. And I find it to be somewhat useful.
Interesting. Yeah.
And frankly, when I used humans as my assistant, oftentimes people never did talk to me. They talked to my assistant more than they ever talked to me, and that was fine because they would get access that way. And then my assistant would tell me where to go and where to be. And that's what I did. So I don't think I would have a problem with that as long as, you train your assistant to give you the information you want. I had a whole set of, operating procedures of what I wanted, like where I wanted to fly, what kind of, seat. So I mean, just all my rules, so I didn't have to always say things. And then also my assistant used to read all my emails. I couldn't get to them.
Right.
And then pick the ones that were important, the ones I had to answer today.
That's right.
Every morning on my desk would be a small page of a calendar and my 10 things I had to get done. So I think those things are really helpful, and I look forward to them getting better.
So in your opinion, do you think AI could replace, let's say, I don't know, the paralegal, or at least make the paralegal's life easier? Or is
it will reduce the number,
the
need. So just take, for example, in the legal business, and I've been pushing this for long time. And now I see a tool that actually could work. When we do due diligence, so take, for example, Google buys a company, which they do often. I used to represent people like Google. And it's a substantial company, 10, 20 years of history, 1,000 employees, 5 or 6 locations. Think about what we have to figure out about that company before you put your money down. We've got to make sure everything's covered, all the litigation. We got to read all the employment contracts. We got to read all your software contracts. We got to make sure all your licenses are in place. We got to check all your real estate. We got to make sure you're not on a Superfund site. The amount of due diligence. And when I started doing it 32 years ago, they would just put you in a room full of folders or boxes. Sometimes I was in a deal in Arkansas. We had 3,000 boxes. That were not just the bankers' boxes, but the big ones.
It's amazing.
And they said, get after it.
Wow.
Go find what you want to find. And they didn't You have no way to search it digitally, so you didn't even have the benefit of a search engine.
Wow.
Read it all, summarize it all. And we used to put like 100 associates in that room writing down stuff. We'd end up with 500 pages of junk.
Wow.
And somebody has to read that and summarize it. And then that have to come to me, and I got to make sense out of it. What are the real issues? And I have to come up with a 1-page, 10-item list because the CEO doesn't care about the little stuff, right? So now I could do that same thing in literally seconds, if not
That's
minutes.
amazing. But just out of curiosity, how much would it cost to have 100 associates in the room, doing something like that?
Tons.
Is that millions or whatever?
Millions.
Wow.
Millions. The cost savings in the legal world alone will be massive. And the quality of the output, and people, trust me, 3:00 in the morning, you're we were literally in a warehouse like 100 degrees in Arkansas. Do you think the associates actually doing a great job of reading the 9,000 document that they're retaining? I don't care how smart they are. I don't care how much pressure they're under. Humans can't do it. And so even if you get from a human, and I think they've done some studies on it, that the return rate on accuracy is lower than the machines even 5 years ago.
Wow.
Okay, so can you imagine today?
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
And then again, you get to query it again. Right, so you see, if you don't like what you see, or you think something's wrong, query it again. You can query it again. Before an associate can go find that document, let alone the paragraph that you're trying to query, you have the answer back and you say, "Give me that paragraph. I can see that paragraph." So in the legal business, it should be and will be a game changer for sure. Now, will it put me out of business? Not for a while, because still the judgment is not there.
Right.
And there's a bias as well, not so much in the legal side, but they miss some things, they miss the nuances of some things. And I guess over time you can train it. But when I go and just get factual data, I don't always get it back. I've had to actually yell. I mean, literally, in writing, I told you this is what and literally it would take me 5 tries to get what I asked for back, because it didn't want to give
back from the LLM.
Yeah.
Oh, you're kidding. You're kidding.
Yeah.
So you knew something, and the LLM wasn't giving it back to you, and you had to tell it. Interesting. Yeah. So that's also a frustration I've had, and so I collaborate with these things all the time for coding, and I run into these cases where either I'm going in this circular loop, and I've started somewhere, and we've kind of got back to the same thing, and somehow I have to break the model out of the loop, or I just simply I know something, and the model's kind of ignoring. So I think they'll get a little bit better at that. But what's interesting to me is that these models are becoming, it turns out, more expensive rather than cheap, right? And so a lot of these companies, and this is Google, and maybe this is Meta, maybe this is OpenAI, they're pushing for this thing called AGI, or kind of artificial general intelligence, where you have some model that maybe knows everything about the world, and maybe that's the way we get to this super intelligence. But some of these latest models, for instance, somebody mentioned one of these latest GPT models could be upwards of like $2,000 a query, right, or something like that.
From the energy point of view, or just
the straight up the cost of running the model. Yeah, exactly. And that's for some of these complicated queries. So imagine you're in a situation where you're doing due diligence, and let's say the other people are doing due diligence, and let's say you have the bucks to spend where you can do like $2,000 a query, and they don't necessarily. And so I wonder if there's going to be a little bit of arms race in terms of who can afford these really expensive models. And I wonder if that's going to end up, winning cases in court.
It does already. I mean, without the models, because right now, the more horsepower you have, I mean, look, the difference. I'll probably get some nasty comments because I was a big lawyer, but there's no doubt there's a difference in quality from the top firms. And when we didn't have digital records, the top firms in New York, they had the lock on all of the best forms, all the best agreements, because not everything was public.
Oh, yeah.
So if you were not on the, those 10 or 20 firms that were doing all the big deals, knew all the things that were going on, you didn't know. So you couldn't even get in that game. If you tried to, you were going to get crushed. And also, if you didn't have 100 lawyers to go do discovery, think about discovery. It's like today when you add all the text and everything else. Now, all of that's, they're all been using AI in that for a while. LLM's been in there for a while, and they're getting much, much better at it for that point of view. Because there's no way. You can't look at 1 million documents. You just can't do it.
It's just physically. So here's the thing. So you're saying AI is good in an assistant. Could you ever picture a situation where there's actually AI in the courtroom making arguments and AI making counter arguments? Can you imagine? Can you ever imagine a scenario where agents have taken over for humans in that respect, or do you think it's going to be just sort of in the realm of the assistant, and the humans are still doing the kind of let's say the face-to-face negotiations, the dirty work, they're actually in court,
I think this is a great question, and
Yeah.
I should be asking you this
Yeah,
question,
yeah.
but I will answer this question because for me, I tried to do this in the legal world for a long time because I just saw that it was a place where you had large data and you need to mine it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Decision making, I think, is a little bit more difficult, although you can see that if you have the rules, we have the laws, we have the statutes, we have the cases, right? AI could go through that. It can predict the answer based on a set of facts with all the analogies. You can teach it that as good as a human, I believe, over time. But as long as humans are responsible for the outcomes, I don't think they'll ever be okay with AI agents making the determination. Because you could easily do it for the judge too.
Right,
Frankly, I think
right.
I think the judge actually, all the judges are going to be yelling at me. I think they'd be better off because I tend to think that they have a lot of bias, and you can't help it. Let's say you're a criminal judge, you do a lot of crime, right? You see criminals every day. After a while, whether you like it or not, you're predisposed against people that come in that are being charged of a crime, whether or not they're guilty. So even though we have the presumption of innocence in America, it doesn't work as well as it should.
They get a little jaded.
Yes, they get a little jaded, and they don't treat the white collar people the same as they treat, what I would call the ordinary criminal. I don't know what there's such a thing as ordinary. People who are doing other kinds of crimes, drugs or assaults or whatever, they're getting treated much differently.
It's interesting.
And you can even look at the sentences that people get.
Yeah.
You can rob a lot of money and live a good life in jail. You could sell a little bit of weed and be in there for 20 years. Think about the disparity. So I think I would like a little bit more of that, and I could see them doing actually a better job. Will people accept it? That's the thing.
So here's the thing, though. So the question: let's say you're going to train a judge model. Question is, what are you going to train it on? And maybe you end up training it on past cases. And so here's the thing: maybe the LLMs actually end up behaving like the judges you're talking about, in the sense that whatever biases the judges have, they come out in the sentences, and they get injected into the training data, and you have an LLM that resembles humans for better or for worse, right? And I think that's one of these funny things, because sometimes when we look at LLMs and the output of LLMs, sometimes it's like staring into a mirror a little bit, and for better or for worse, right? And sometimes, you end up getting the worst parts of humanity out. And so, a lot of companies like Google, they have these safety measures in there that sort of, make sure that after the fact, we redact and we suppress some of that stuff. But, for better or for worse. And I was talking to this guy on the plane on the way over here who said he was an extreme libertarian. And what he said he'd like to see are essentially these totally uncensored models that just basically spewing out, and that's a little bit of a tough sell, but I'll tell you this: I think if let's just say, knock on wood, for the sake of argument, let's say humanity went away tomorrow, and all we had left were these LLMs, and some alien species comes down to Earth, they're studying humanity, all they have are these LLMs. In some sense, do we want these do we want these anthropological aliens to see us, how we really are, or do they want to see this kind of sanitized, sort of censored version of humanity? It's an interesting question,
Well, having this conversation with you is actually appropriate, because the other thing you could do, and you would understand, and you would probably be a proponent, you could then go and you can take these LLMs and then teach it ethics.
Right.
But then again, we have an argument over which ethics is right. We go over, each philosopher has their own view. Can we go with Kant? Who are we going to go with, right? And then you've got that battle. We don't even agree on what the best way for humanity is to live. If we could come up with a universal ethical model, I actually probably would be more inclined to be AI doing because you if you train it, they have the parameters and you've agreed on it, and you can go. So I think that's what people are going to do at some point. I think they will agree on the bias. Right. And then they'll know the bias is, and they can live with it or not.
No, that's right. And another friend of mine, he went a little step further, and he said basically, given humans' track record in terms of justice and all that stuff, so what happens with these models is, after you train them, there's a kind of secondary training where every time the LLM tells you something, you can kind of give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And based on these thumbs up and thumbs down, it kind of modifies the behavior after the fact. And what he was saying is, given humans' track record on things like justice and whatever, humans maybe we shouldn't even be in that training loop. Maybe actually, given our track record, maybe we should kind of step this one out.
No, it's sort of like game theory or war games. We might want to let the AI look at all of the history. And say, this was good, this was bad. I would love to see that analysis at the end of the day, no matter what.
But unfortunately, I mean, the LLM may come up with it may come to a conclusion that we don't like.
Humans, maybe humans are the problem. And that very well could be the case, and that's not a crazy solution or collusion. And then we got to decide what to do with that. So I think that's the beauty of what we have here, though, Peter. We can actually test these theories.
Right.
At a large scale with a lot of stuff. So the costing, I was not aware of that. I want to go back on that a little bit because I've had this conversation with another young friend of mine, and she was saying to me, because her boyfriend uses ChatGPT for everything, even to find out where a restaurant is. I'm saying, she goes, you realize how much expensive it is to use that, energy-wise versus just a normal Google search. Is it true that there's a big difference between those searches?
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, the word on the streets is that a lot of these companies are losing money, and essentially,
that I'm sure of.
Right. And so if it's true that, for instance, a really expensive query is on the order of $2,000, even if you're paying $200 a month or whatever, it doesn't cover. And so the cost comes in a few ways. So one is to even train these things, right? So we're getting into the billions of dollars in terms of training these things, which means that really only a Meta, a Google, and OpenAI can really pull that off. Right. Here's the interesting thing, though. I think that's actually going to get more expensive because what they're talking about right now is there's these whole like corpuses of information, like let's say the New York Times and whatever, that's totally off limits. And the idea is that you can't train a model on that because New York Times would lose their shirt. And actually, they're right. And so what I think might happen in the future, maybe somebody like the New York Times will say, okay, I'm going to license my material to OpenAI, so that they can train the next GPT, and maybe I'll do it for a couple $100 million or a couple billion or whatever, and that'll sort of get amortized in the cost of training these models. And so maybe instead of a few billion bucks, maybe it's tens, maybe it's who knows, maybe once you factor in these licensing costs, maybe training these models will be astronomical. And then the interesting thing about that too is that so let's say there's all these licensing deals. Maybe OpenAI gets a New York Times deal, and maybe Google gets a Washington Post. And so maybe at that point, once these licensing deals come into the training, maybe you actually see the models diverge in some sense, almost like, online you have this Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, and, you want to watch a show and you have to go here, you have to go there. Maybe at some point you'll have to go to one of these models because that it happened to be trained on New York Times, and that's kind of what you're into. So I think that's going to be factored into the cost. But then just the cost of running the things is astronomical. These chips are really expensive. And here's a funny thing. If one of the byproducts of AI happens to be like a renaissance in nuclear, maybe that'll be an interesting side effect.
They're talking about it. I mean, of course, all the Bitcoin miners are going to try to switch over to data mining. So they're going to go from one money sink of keeping, a blockchain alive.
Right.
To now, providing the energy for this stuff, and I don't think people realize it costs money either way. It costs money to keep blockchain. It's going to cost money to keep the AI. And now, of course, it's like everything else. When you start, the freemium model, right?
Right.
So, is it going to be advertising? I mean, look, all the other things. The internet survived on advertising. Why can't AI advertise?
No, it's true.
I mean, you're going to get pushed stuff, right? I mean, how else can they support this?
And I've been thinking about that for a while because let's say one of these places did go with the advertising model. Does that mean when you get your results back from the LLM, they're going to throw in a little ad to Joe's Pizza down the street, and they're just going to kind of work it in a subtle way, or is it going to be kind of on the sidebar like it used to be for Google search? That's a really interesting question.
No, I think your agent's going to be popping up and suggesting things for you to do.
Actually, probably
right. I mean, hey John, you want dinner tonight? So and so, Absolutely. And I'm already almost bought into that at some level now with all the other stuff. I see this as being absolutely the next stage. I don't see how else they can support it. I mean, people don't want to pay. They don't pay.
No, it's true.
They pay, but they pay it without knowing it by paying it through their purchasing power.
Well, and here's the thing. I had this. I met a couple. This is a couple months ago. I met with some of the top people in like the Google App Store. And I always assumed for some reason that they got their money off of subscriptions. And they said 90% of their revenue is from advertising, 10% subscriptions. The subscription thing doesn't work. And I think you're right. I think advertising works and subscription just, I don't know, for whatever reason, it just doesn't scale. And,
well, because first of all, they give away the apps for free, but they all
Yeah.
have in-app purchases, which is
Right.
where they must generate the revenue. They get their 40% of that, right?
That's right. That too. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it'll be inevitable. And, some of these places like, what is it? I think Anthropic or some Perplexity, one of these things, is actually playing with that. And I think if you do a Perplexity, query, sometimes you see these ads kind of on the side. So no, that'll be interesting. And maybe that's inevitable. But I just wonder in the future, there's this funny thing with farmers and water. And, water rights is one of these like kind of ancient, legal battles. And the idea is if your farm is closer to the source of the stream, you get the first dibs and whatever. And I wonder if power is going to be a little bit like that. I mean, I wonder in the future, basically, let's say these nuclear plants sort of spring up, I wonder if you're going to be dibs on basically getting your data center right in the nuclear, right in the power plant, and in some sense, I wonder if energy is just going to be one of those things that's fought after in the future, as these models get huge and hungry and.
Well, I have a feeling they will become somewhat utility-like, so they'll become a utility. I mean, I see that with Bitcoin. It makes no sense for me. At some point, it's just an electricity.
Yeah.
Okay.
You mean the LLMs will be a utility?
Yeah, I think so too, because at some point, it's going to require so much electricity. You're going to have to put them at the... And by the way, all the Bitcoin miners, where do they locate? They locate next to the power sources, right? So they're putting their trailers there, and they're going to be the data centers. So they'll absolutely be at the data sources, and they're going to continuously look for better pricing. And because people are going to, just like TikTok, because people are going to be so hooked on this stuff, you're just going to pay through your taxes.
Wow.
They're going to distribute the cost of the energy to run AI through taxes. That's kind of what we do.
So if something like that happens, though, does the government then have, do they have a say in what the LLM sort of does and doesn't? Do they?
They will try, as they always do, right? So the question is, how much can they? This is the one area where I think they're kind of a little bit nervous, at least from the people I talk to, because they may not be able to get control of this in the way that they got control of everything else. I mean, the fact that they could even get the major media sources to shut down stuff, that was pretty powerful.
Right.
And that came without any legal basis, okay, but they got away with it. This could be so distributed that for them to go after every little company, like, they killed crypto for a while. Now it's back, but they literally, the SEC tried to kill it.
Wow.
They tried to kill the marijuana business. They debanked both of those industries. So if you were in those industries, you can't get banked.
Oh, right.
You couldn't custody it. You couldn't get a bank account. If you were a company, when I bought a big, Bitcoin mining company with a SPAC, no bank would take us.
Wow.
We couldn't even get a banking,
Wow.
So they told the banks, these guys are persona non grata, and they literally debanked entire industries.
Incredible.
They could do that to AI.
Wow.
I don't think they will, but I think this one got out of the gate so fast. I don't think they're going to get their arms around it, and I think the problem is you can move it offshore very easily.
Oh, yeah.
See, this is a real issue, right? So right now, I know that I have many companies. These guys are smart, right? They're smart. You're smart. They won't be constrained by the geographic boundaries.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is it's so easy to spin up and train a model. I mean, you can take a pre-existing model, and a model really is just a collection of weights. At the end of the day, it's a collection of numbers, and it might be easy to copy them, train them, and let's say for the sake of argument, let's say you have a particularly obnoxious model that it's spewing out whatever sort of illegal garbage. Let's say for the sake of argument, somebody declares this model to be illegal because it's just dangerous, and let's say somebody comes and does just tweaks it a little bit, and changes some of the weights. Is that new model also, is it also contraband? Some of these things are just, some of these questions are going to be a little bit difficult.
Well, the legal industry is struggling with the whole notion of intellectual property rights and all that. Right. This is a challenge. And the problem, I think, is that, at least from my perspective, is there's a lot of good law out there already on IP, and a lot of it can be applied here. But just like they did with crypto, I think the mistake happens if you bring in a bunch of younger people who don't have any history of IP or any history of how you deal with these rights and derivative works and all that. They want to create a whole new system. What they don't realize is that old system took hundreds of years to mature to deal with every type of thing. Remember, what inventions 100 years ago are a lot different than inventions today. So it's not like new technology doesn't come along; it comes along all the time. And the legal structure has been able to evolve with it. But when you want to just throw it all out and create something new, sometimes what you create is much worse. And I think that's what's happening in crypto. And so now they're kind of going back and sort of saying, well, maybe we could use these rules. Maybe they do apply. And I think the same thing can happen here.
I mean, I often wondered, I had this, I was doing this experiment a while back where I wanted to create a model which generated buildable like Lego sets. Right. And, the idea is you could order the parts and whatever. And you could speak something into existence. You get the set and order the parts. And I was trying to figure out, from a lawyer's point of view, how would you deal with something like that? Let's say it was trained on other Lego models. Is it a derivative work? Is that sort of a fair use thing? If you make some money on it, are you actually infringing on IP in some sense? Is that all covered by this pre-existing IP law that you're talking about?
It is just the most. I think it is. Because it's just, to me, it's always, the laws are very broad and defined, and they're supposed to be able to analogize to newer things. Mm-hmm. And for the most part they can. And then they'll have cases that will make those interpretations. And once those cases are there, that becomes the law. So somebody will fight it out over an interpretation. It may go all the way to Supreme Court, may not. We have plenty of laws that we respect that are not all the way at the Supreme Court level, where we're satisfied with the outcome. Yeah. And not so much you might like it either way. You just like there's an answer. Right. So you can conduct business, right? So you know what the limits are. You know what you might need to get a license for. You know what your protections are.
Well, so that's what I was trying to figure out. So when a judge makes a ruling, in some sense, that becomes a precedent, and that sort of thing can actually be like, you can actually have a legitimate legal innovation when a judge makes some sort of ruling, right?
Yeah.
And so, a few minutes ago we were talking about LLMs as judges sort of making judgments. So if it was a case that LLMs were sitting there as judges making judgments, in some sense these LLMs would actually be creating new law.
Yes.
Is that basically, I see. And essentially that's a little bit heavy, right?
But that's our system. Almost, although we have a lot of laws on the book, our case law is enormous. It's hundreds of years old, and it all still matters. We can still refer to cases that are 100 years old. We go all the way back to the Roman law. I mean, we have precedent that we've evolved, but we use the British, common law system, which is, I think, actually very good because it gives a lot more freedom to adjust without having to pass new laws. If you're in a civil process, you have to keep passing new laws. Right. It's ridiculous, and it's impossible.
So there's this funny thing about LLMs, though, and maybe the jury's still out on this, is people are trying to figure out whether they're legitimately creative, right? And whether the LLMs can whether they're capable of just reassembling pre-existing stuff, or whether you can count on them for like legitimate kind of creative things. And I know people are dabbling in stuff like music and this and that.
I've heard good things about music. People have told me that they, like really, somebody who knows like the piano stuff. He goes, he created a whole new concert. I think maybe you told me about that, creating a whole new concert, in the Chopin, and it was like amazing, right?
Yeah.
So it's amazing because it sounds exactly like them.
Well, so that's the thing.
And they change enough things. There's enough modalities to change and stuff like that.
I mean, it's passable. I mean, it passes as Chopin, but that's the thing. Chopin actually did the work of creating it from scratch.
In his head.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So somehow that kind of from scratch thing, where somebody's creating something brand new, I wonder if LLMs are capable of that, And there's this funny thing where, the study came out, and I think it was some study in Canada a few weeks ago. So they were trying to figure out how LLMs affect our creativity. And they had these two groups of students, and they had some creative task. I forget what it was. But so one of them had access to LLMs and one of them didn't. And the ones that had access to LLMs, they got off the ground a little bit more quickly in the sense that they weren't staring at this blank page. But then when it came to the second task, it turns out that the LLM group was like far less creative than the people who were forced to face that blank page. And so I just wonder whether, it'll just be interesting to see how this develops, and whether an over-reliance on LLMs actually affects our ability to be creative and our ability to think, right? That's going to be kind of the interesting long-term thing.
Well, you remember, you were although Manolis was remote. So when we had Manolis the first time, I'm talking about Manolis Kellis, the guy at MIT AI lab.
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant guy. I love him. And we asked him that question because I was concerned. What's going to happen? Are people going to become dumber? Because I don't like to say this because I hope it's not true, but just in my own observation, with lawyers coming out of the top schools and looking at the work product over the last 30 years, it's not that they're dumber. They're just not doing the work that we used to do, and they're not as excited about doing the work. Like for me, it was like, everything was a blank slate. Learning the law was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Reading these cases from these amazing jurists, these Supreme Court cases and the way they wrote, when you read philosophy, I mean,
Right.
it's music.
Yeah, it's true.
And the way great thinkers wrote without any of this extra stuff.
Right.
We don't recreate that today, and it's gotten worse and worse. So for me, I would love to hear a little more of that and a little less of getting the quick and dirty answer.
Yeah.
And in a small text, people can't spell, people can't write a full sentence.
Right.
So I see a lot of bad sides, and I'm worried about that. And I'm worried that if people don't make themselves better, like for me, and I tell people, look, use ChatGPT, use Grammarly. If you're not producing output at the level that you should be proud of, then use those tools to get it better. But not to throw out a piece of, the first cut.
Yeah.
And I use these tools.
Right.
They're helpful. I use spell checker, of course, even though I'm a pretty good speller.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I don't want any mistakes in my work. But Manolis said he thought that people, this was, I thought, very interesting, and I kind of hope he's right. He said that people all are going to have an agent. You're going to have to. It's almost like every bed in your mind. You're going to need that. And that somehow, because we have all this extra available time to think and create, that somehow we're going to become bigger thinkers and big creators. I have not seen that. I think the more people get tools, the lazier they get. I haven't seen that. So I hope he's right, but I don't think he's right.
Maybe he's right. I feel like it's a little bit optimistic, and it's just because the human creature is efficient. And I think when your brain realizes that you're not using certain neural pathways, it prunes them, right? If you're not using certain muscles, they go flaccid. So it's just, the body has this amazing ability to prune things. It's a use it or lose it kind of thing. And here's a funny thing. So let's say, you put in your 10,000 hours, right? To kind of gain to become competent. And, maybe I had to do the same thing in engineering. And so, when I take a look at the output of an LLM, when it's telling me code, I can sort of, based on, let's say, this time that I've put in to become competent, I can kind of say, oh, the code's okay, but, the structure's wrong, and I can sort of guide the LLM. But take somebody who hasn't put that time in, let's say they started their career with LLMs, how do you get enough distance, to be able to say that this, maybe this output's not great, or to be able to guide it in certain ways? Like, you said when we started the conversation that there was some fact or something that you knew, and you had to beat the LLM over the head to use this thing. And I
wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for, like you said, the 30 years of experience.
So if you haven't put in that work to get that intuition, how do you collaborate with the LLM on equal footing? Because otherwise it just seems like the LLM is going to be in control. And in some sense, you're the passenger, right? And that's, I don't, it's going to be interesting to see how that resolves itself.
I think you're going to see I worry that you're going to have an elite class of people with experience that are going to be severely advantaged with LLMs and AI. But that's only going to last for a while until that experience where no one comes up with the prior experience. So if you don't develop it on the side or similar somehow, and maybe you can learn it all from interacting with the models. It's possible, right? You may be able to read more.
Maybe, but I don't know. There's this funny thing in Silicon Valley where
by the way, I know I read more because of it.
Oh, really?
I've added to my. I read everything,
Wow.
and I keep asking for more,
wow.
more because I'm like a kid with a candy. It's like, for me, information is king. And to get more of it and structured, I'm addicted to it.
No, it's a great point, but the problem is if you're getting your information from the LLM, it's already been digested in some sense, right? And you're not, the funny thing about Silicon Valley, there's this funny thing where, for a lot of time, these people who were in charge of like social media, let's say, they wouldn't let their kids use it, right? They wouldn't give their kids phones. They keep their kids off Facebook because in some sense they know what the side effects of that sort of thing are. And let's just say for the sake of argument, let's just say the pessimistic view, let's say the LLMs actually cause people to be somewhat lazy. Like you said, is there going to be an elite class of people who basically keep their kids LLM free for about 18 years or whatever it is?
I don't know if they'll keep them free, but I think what I'm seeing, and I'm thinking, this is weird. This is weird that we get off of this topic because it's really something I think about a lot. Okay, because I want the next generations to do better. I'm not competing against them.
Yeah.
Okay. I went out of my way to make it better for my kids. I went out of my way to do everything better. My parents did that for me. It's never occurred to me to sort of, okay, I now have an advantage because I have this skill set that I can take with AI and I can disadvantage the younger kids. And I don't want to do that. But what they do need to do, and I think you're right, and I've been thinking about this, maybe coming up with some kind of an academy. I think some people are thinking about this where you got to have to say, okay, you get to use that tool, but it's like anything else. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was a young guy, I was in construction. In order to learn anything in construction, it's like you said, you got to put your time.
Yeah.
You get to buy a tool belt the first day. You don't get to put anything in it.
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Till you master the tool, you didn't get to put it in your tool belt. So every day, you'd have to work so many hours. You have to prove that you know how to use the hammer. You had to know everything about the hammer. And then you get a hammer.
Wow.
And so there was this process of training that you didn't get to use the tools until you mastered them. If we could figure that out, what a great situation that would be. But that's going to take discipline and time, and it's going to take a trainer that's not the LLM potentially. Or maybe we could teach the LLM to do it, but somehow somebody's going to have to make you do it first and understand what your tools are meant for. So,
I mean, I guess, I wonder if that's literally like, learning your times tables before you have access to the calculator,
without a doubt.
So maybe it's something like that. But you're right, the kid's going to have to be in a controlled environment. And then there's this funny thing where there's this cat and mouse game right now where there are these detection tools out there that supposedly can detect, is this thing LLM written or not, and the LLMs keep getting better. And I think they're trying to, and the kids are trying to outsmart the tools by like basically telling the LLM to write specifically with bad spelling and bad grammar, maybe like a semi-literate, sixth grader.
Dumb it down. Yeah. You could do that. So again, another point on this is, and I really think about this a lot because I really want to figure out a solution, but if you think about this sort of training, right, and if you didn't have it, like for me, math, okay, I didn't have, I grew up with I'm old enough, slide rule, okay, I first did calculus with a slide rule, so that was a joke. I mean, I remember using that thing, and they didn't even have T1s back then, then we get a T1, then you had to learn a whole new language of putting everything in reverse, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you had to learn to program your calculator. And I didn't find that to be as useful, frankly. I was actually doing it faster longhand than it was to figure out how to, to learn the new tool.
Wow.
And then, then when spreadsheets came out, and I'll never forget this, I work with all these finance guys. I'm a lawyer, but I started off, in engineering, and I also did econometrics, so I know how to model. So I know a few things that lawyers don't know. But whenever I used to look at a spreadsheet, I used to do math in my head, not to the, to the 12th decimal point. You don't need to. I come up with, general rules, back of the napkin stuff, rounding errors, just to get to some sense of it, just to see if directionally it's correct. And I would see breaks in these spreadsheets. People used to say, John, how did you? I said, because just look at this column, look at this number here. Then look at some of these. It can't be, right? It just can't be. I don't need to add up the column to know that it's not right. Or you're telling me the company, has got 20 million of revenue and 300 million of EBITDA. I think you got a problem in your model. But literally, these analysts, if it's in the spreadsheet, it's golden. There was no questioning of the spreadsheet.
Wow.
And I see the same thing today. When people get an answer from ChatGPT, they're not going to question it.
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. That's great. I mean, here's the problem. Somehow you have to have an intuition about the world to determine that, the answer you're getting from ChatGPT is off, and to be able to question ChatGPT. And, something like that will happen to me. I'll just get something back from the model. Maybe when I'm coding, it's just off. And so I'll kind of drill down with the model. But that's given this prior intuition that I've earned, through the tens of thousands of hours of work. And so recreating that's going to be really interesting. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Plato recently for some reason.
For all the good reasons. I've been doing that too. I can't believe you're doing the same thing. I can't sleep at night. I watch philosophy shows. I love it.
But their whole thing was dialogue, right? And somehow dialogue was the act of philosophizing. As you got together with somebody and you talked, and you and even at the end of the conversation, you may not even come to a conclusion. They have a lot of these dialogues that they ended. I think it's called aporia. But they basically they had a great time. They found some things. But you know what? At the end of the day, they realized there's these unanswered questions. So, I wonder, are we going back to that kind of model? So let's say you and I, let's say we put our 10,000 hours in, we were wrestling with books and paper and pens and that sort of thing. Basically, we essentially, we put our 10,000 hours in alone. Are these kids going to be putting in their 10,000 hours with an LLM in this kind of, this dialogue, this kind of dialectic thing? I mean, is that another form of learning? Or do you really have to wrestle with the book, wrestle with the written word, alone at a desk, in order to put in your 10,000 hours,
I think for me, again, this is a great conversation. It's like the stuff I struggle with. For me, it's about going back to first principles and also the original sources. So I don't want my LLM to synthesize Plato for me, I actually kind of want to go back and sort of read it.
Yeah.
And if I can get my LLM to feed it to me in a way that I can do it, whether I'm getting it on Audible, I do Audibles. I have I don't go anywhere without reading a book. I do 3 books a week. Okay, so I can't I can't help myself. Yeah. So and I'm on all these other feeds, and I'm seeing so much stuff, and I'm testing out like at least 10 different AI programs, for different parts of my business. But I always want to go to the sources.
Yeah.
For some reason, maybe it's my skepticism, I don't trust anything that's derivative unless I see the source material. Because in my business in particular, smart lawyers, their job is to limn the facts in a way that suits them, they can take the same facts and without making a misrepresentation, but tell you a story that's completely opposite than the story I'm going to tell you with the same facts and no lies. So that's the funny thing about the news media. If they were really smart, they wouldn't have to tell lies. They could tell the same story with the same facts if they were good. And that would be persuasive. That's what lawyers do. That's how they're trained. So I worry about that. So for me, it's always about original sources. Jen will know this. Whenever we do fact checking, we try to get to the most, the best sources. Science is no longer a good source, right? We have so political now. So it's going to be a challenge. So I think if we have people that do that, but I worry that no one will care like we care, because they didn't grow up with it.
Well, so that's the thing. So, even Google, so let's say take the Google era, which I guess is kind of, somebody mentioned to me the other day, I think this is around the elections, that they ended up going to Google to search for some of the information. In California, we have these propositions. And the propositions are always written in a really deceptive way, such that somehow voting for it, it's the opposite. It's almost the opposite of what you expect. And so somebody said they tried feeding these propositions to an LLM. Anyway, it didn't work. And so they said they went back to quote unquote good old like Google search, right? And I remember, and some people are basically laughing about that, like you're actually going back to Google search. But the way the Google search used to work, at least, is you would search and then you would have to synthesize the primary documents. Right. You'd read and whatever. And so the fact that you're one step removed from that's a little bit dangerous in the sense that, whatever biasing is happening behind the scenes, whether that's accidental or intentional, in some sense you don't have any access to that, and neither does the model, right? So like let's say you get back something from the model which is bizarre, and it's bizarre. If you try to question the model about it, like, hey, how'd you come up with this? Is this part of your training set? Did somebody prompt you into this? Have you been biased? The model itself doesn't know. And in fact, nobody does, except for, maybe the people that train the thing, and maybe not even them. And so, once you're removed from the material like that, it would be easy for somebody to, maybe a malicious person or whatever, to subtly introduce biases that are, difficult to detect. And and depending on who's training and hosting the model, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad.
Well, it will all come down to, unfortunately, Peter, this is sort of my tragic assessment of humanity, is that people are going to take advantage of this financially in any way they possibly can, or power-wise. And unless there's enough people who care about people, and the private sector is not going to do that. The not-for-profit sector just doesn't have the juice, just never has, never will. Okay, I wish it did, but it doesn't. The government is our worst case solution. They're most likely to be wrong compared to the private sector. So it's not a good scenario, but I would hope, that enough people pay attention to this over the next 20 years and don't let it go down that path and somehow find a way to make this tool useful. I love it.
Yeah.
You know, I would not want to be without it.
Right.
I want that tool available to me to do good things.
Yeah.
And I want it to be available to other people who want to do good things.
No,
and
yeah,
I hope
exactly.
that, so
Yeah.
I think it's going to come back to ethics. It's going to come back to getting human beings to sort of really care enough about each other and to take these tools and use them appropriately and train their children. And maybe now we got to change the way we teach kids. Maybe we do have to have a 6 or 8 year period where they don't have access.
Yeah.
You know, just like I went in the military. That was the best thing ever happened. You know, you don't have a phone. You don't have, you know, you're out in the middle of nowhere. You don't have access. Okay. And you're focused on the moment and on the training.
No, it's true. It's true. And, you know, and here's the other thing, John, is that these models, in some sense, they represent the greatest common denominator, right? In the sense that they've been trained on, let's say, millions of pages of material, and they're really the average, in some sense, of all that material. They're the average of humanity. And there's a strange thing where, you know, once in a while, once in a generation, you get these geniuses, and let's say you get a Plato, you get a Beethoven, something like that. And if from youth, you know, they've been exposed, let's say, to, like, you know, sort of the average of humanity and so, you know, who knows whether they would have had these great ideas. And so maybe you really do have to spend some time, you know, struggling with these things. And, you know, because occasionally what happens with these models, I know, like if I have to write a talk or a program, something like that, and I'm faced with a blank page, you know, in some sense, the blank page is the ultimate existential crisis. And, like, you know, how the hell am I going to start this thing? And the LLM sort of relieves you of that burden. But I wonder if every once in a while you have to struggle with it, and you have to struggle with a blank page in order to do things that are truly new and truly exceptional. And so if the LLM comes along and says, hey, you know what, don't worry about that blank page thing, you know, let me relieve you of this burden. You know, I wonder in some sense if that's occasionally a disservice, you know. And you know.
Well, you've hit something, again, I get to use my own life, but I've been around long enough that I've seen a lot of different things. I worked for a lawyer. His name is Roger Milgram. He's the dean of IP, intellectual property. He wrote the book.
Wow.
Okay, if you wanted, it's a 6-book treatise. And I remember his methodology, which I always thought was crazy, because I'm in the law business. You use precedents. You always start with somebody else's form, right? Because it's already been developed and it's been vetted, and, you know, you try to start with a basic outline. He would not allow that.
Interesting.
He wrote all of his contracts from scratch.
Wow.
And when he gave him a document to review, he made you print it this way, and he made you have like 60% of it had to be white so that he could make the notes over here. And then, this is on top, he had his 6-volume treatise. He would quote like footnotes and the page numbers. That's how it was. So, you know, he was so impressive, and he was so strict. But boy, it really did help. And then I remember doing a couple of projects where I actually come up with stuff that wasn't in the forms. Because no one had even thought about it in 20 years because they just used the form.
That's amazing.
And I didn't know it wasn't in the form.
That's amazing.
Right? So I said, wow, there's an improvement. And that will never happen if you start here. You'll never improve on it that much.
That's right.
It's so incremental that it's not helpful. You'll never have that aha moment.
That's right.
And the only thing that I keep hope alive is artists. Artists don't make a lot of money, yet their creative side is amazing. Okay? And they will do things, and they get a feeling of a sense of purpose from art, whether it's dance or music or even sports to some extent. And to do that gives me hope. We need more of that mindset. So I think that's been pushed kind of out of the school systems.
Interesting. Yeah, you're right.
They don't value that. And I think it's a big mistake, because the creativity there. Now, not all of it's great. I mean, a lot of art is, but it's still there, and it still evolves. You see more changes in art and dance and music than you do in other places.
No, but that's the other thing too, is that in order to come up with that gem, you have to produce a lot of garbage. You know, a lot of garbage goes into, you know, and there's some joke about, you know, somebody said he was, I don't know, somehow he got some book published or some whatever, and he said he was kind of an overnight success that took about 20 years. You know? And but that process of generating garbage, you know, that may be part of the you know, the brainstorming thing, that may be part of the creative process. Yeah, if you take that away, I wonder, you know, I'm not sure what the result is. But anyway, I wonder if it's one of those things where, we've always had these kind of solitary geniuses. And I think, Zarathustra, for some reason, supposedly he's this guy that represents the kind of solitary genius. He goes away to the desert, he goes to a cave, and, he starts coming up with stuff from scratch. I wonder if those types, that solitary genius, I wonder if they will know that they have to have a balanced diet of LLM, in the sense that, I wonder if they'll just intuitively know that they have to deal with the tabula rasa, they have to deal with the blank page. Occasionally they can use the LLM as a tool. And I wonder if those types will be okay. And I just wonder if it's the other types, that over-rely on the LLMs, whether that's a little bit,
I think I don't think we'll be able to avoid that, because you won't grow up without it. So, if you only grew up, I always love this, there's the mathematician did the same thing. He got up at the same time every morning. He never left his house. Right. Walked down the street, and but produced an amazing body of work. Or even Alexander Hamilton writing the Federalist Papers by candlelight. How do you do that, right? How do you do that at 22 years old, And he had read everything that was able to be read at the time. And those people they took advantage of everything that was available, which was the written word, right? So I think today you're going to have this tool, and if you're a genius, I think you're going to use it. Whether they use it effectively or not, I don't know. But
that's a good point.
I don't think there's a way around it, because I see now that it's just in your blood now.
It's true. And John, what actually gives me a little bit of hope, so my kids, when they, anytime they see anything on the internet, and anytime they see an AI generated image, one of the things they'll say is, "Oh man, that's so AI." And so, my kids have been steeped in this thing basically since they've been conscious, and they actually learn to identify it. And the funny thing is, they reject it. And so, for whatever reason, for these kids that grow up kind of in the AI first world, they actually really value, for instance, handwritten things. And so maybe I wonder if there's some hope for this generation.
No, I think there is. It's a good point, because not only that, but I realize this. I can't tell what's what. It comes the memes and. My son and they know everything about this, and there's so much information out there where people are calling it out. They love to call out everything. So you have 1 million critiques out there a day.
Right.
So I guess with that much criticism, maybe you can't get away with bullshit, and that might be good. So maybe just the crowdsourcing, which I never was a big fan of, because I don't like to go with the opinion. But I don't think you can get away for a long time with something that's fake, because people are going to call you out on it.
No, it's true. And there's this famous internet thing where somebody said, listen, I'm not going to bother to read something that nobody bothered to write. So in other words, if there's somebody out there doing a LinkedIn post, or they're phoning it in, they're using LLMs, or doing something, people, I think they detect that and they tune out. And actually one of the things, one of the most, one of the favorite emails I've ever gotten, I got this email from Sundar. This was a while back, and I remember that was amazing, because you could tell that the thing was handwritten, because it was basically a few words, no punctuation, no capitalization. And I thought, man, what a beautiful email this is. I can Gemini apparently did not write this.
Yeah.
And in some sense, it had it had a little bit of a value for me in that sense. And so I just, so I wonder if one reason to be optimistic is that people continue to value sort of high value output. People, if you take the time to write the email, if you take the time to, I wonder if people actually continue to value that. And and these people that sort of over rely on LLMs for email, for the LinkedIn or whatever. And by the way, people now they're using LLMs to do podcasts, right? And the funny thing is
I hadn't heard that. I mean, I have heard it, but I hadn't seen one. Maybe I have. I don't know.
And I don't know if it's just me. I can't listen to it. I can get about 90 seconds in, and it's not the voices. The funny thing about the voices is they're really human-like, in the sense that you have people doing ums and ahs, they even laugh back and forth. I mean, they've really done a number in terms of just making it sort of human-like. But there's just something. Something a little bit sterile, something a little bit too clean. So I can't put my finger on it, but it's a kind of thing where, because when you get two humans together, talking, it's always a little bit messy. I think Janet, she came to fix the microphone stand and stuff like that, and but there's just something about it which is, I don't know. It's valuable. You learn something. You feel like you're in the room with people, and
So Jen and I had this conversation, because she says, people really want authenticity. They don't really want that polished version. And I always used to aspire, because I was always admire people that were great speakers or were great on the camera, or professors that could do an hour and a half, without an I had a lawyer friend of mine who's one of my dearest friends. He speaks in full paragraphs that you think that, that he thought them through. And after the 20 minutes, if you taped it, you wouldn't need to do much editing.
That's
now,
amazing.
when I speak and I listen to it and I see it on paper, my talking brain and my writing brain are just completely different. If you listen to me, you think I'm an idiot, but if you read my writing, you might think I know something. But they're completely different. And I wanted to change that, but Jed said, John, that's who you are. People get it. They understand you. You're not having a problem communicating. But I think that's true. And I listen to people like that. It's more fun.
Yeah. No, it's true.
More fun.
Once in a while, you heard
but I do admire the people who are good.
Yeah, of course.
I truly do.
And and they probably practice at it like an art. You ever heard of this thing, Toastmasters or whatever?
Yeah, sure.
And so anyway, I went to a couple of these things, and so there was some guy that was literally counting my ums and my ahs, man. And it's a little bit it's a humiliation ritual. You get done, you've been talking for 7 minutes, and the guy says, you said 13 times, and they do have these people that for whatever reason they've purged it from the vocabulary. But, they have these people, you can tell they've really studied it, and they don't and they don't ah anymore, but they've forgotten the art of like being able to say something, and it's...
Or what I do is I see patterns of using the same canned language.
Right.
Like I don't have that. I have stories that I might tell over and over. The older I get, I might tell the same stories more than once, but it's never canned.
Right.
It's I had to memorize it. I don't think I can memorize it, but it's in my mind because I did it. So if you're telling your own story, you kind of remember it. But I've watched some of my good people, like my partner John D'Agostino. He's great, but he told me, John, I took acting classes. What do you think?
Really?
In college, I wanted to be an actor. He goes, of course I'm good at this. And they go, you are. I mean, you're amazing. He's amazing at it. But he also does have the storyteller's knack, which I think is incredibly important. But at the same time, I do notice that he does prepare pieces that he uses over and over again. And if you have heard him before, you know that that's one of his pieces. But he's amazing, and he's really good at it, and he can, switch on a dime. And he has such a repertoire of knowledge that he can pretty much interact with anyone. And that's a real skill. And I've always wanted to have that, but I'm too late in life. Today, I'm just going to stick to trying to figure this stuff out and try to help the next generation figure it out. So what's going on in the next 12 months for you guys? I know you got a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah. So that's what So like I meant, this has been going on for a little while, but for some reason over the past month or so, this agentic thing has really taken off, and so I think that's going to be Google's next push. And I know that Claude and Anthropic and a couple of these places and OpenAI, they're also pushing in that direction. But really, that's just these LLMs. Taking action in the world on your behalf. And that could be sort of, LLMs taking over your computer and doing tedious things. It could be, LLMs booking reservations, flights, and that sort of thing. And, and really, like I mentioned before, if it gets to the point where, each of us has an army of personal agents kind of negotiating with other people's AI agents on our behalf, I mean, that world will get a little bit interesting. And like I said, I think at that point, though, the person whose pockets are the deepest, just in terms of being able to afford the best models and the best agents, might have the best outcomes when it comes to stuff like that, and negotiating. And so we'll see how that plays out in the next few years. But I think the current focus is just on some of these tedious tasks that you have to do every day, and maybe automating something you do on the laptop all the time, or maybe like you mentioned, some agent is out there constantly looking for new things to do, and letting you know when there's some restaurant, some movie or whatever. So we'll see how that plays out. But for me, I guess just the biggest question is, let's say you have one of these LLMs, and would you personally, would you trust it to take over your computer? Could you see yourself saying something like, "Hey, go ahead and make a couple, write a couple emails on my behalf. Maybe sell a few stocks while you're at it." Could you see sort of like you hand these things over to an assistant to a certain extent? Could you see yourself handing them over to an LLM, or is the what's your trust level basically with these things?
It's gone up.
Yeah, interesting.
So there's more things I would definitely delegate.
Yeah.
As long as I could give the instruction set.
Right.
And
Right.
I would
Right.
test it, at a low risk level at the first and see how it does, and then
Yeah.
I would move it on. There's tasks that absolutely need to be done. I'll give you some just simple examples. If you could get me an LLM or an AI tool that could go through my contact list and clean it up.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I've tried a million apps. They don't do it. It's
Yeah.
horrible. So I have multiple versions of all these contacts over 30 some odd years. It's a
Right.
mess. That alone would be a tool that I would die
Interesting.
for.
Interesting.
Another one is I now also have 30 years of files on my computer and on in the cloud. I have no idea what's in there. What happens when I die?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I would love to go through there now, clean that stuff up, get rid of everything that's irrelevant, find what is relevant, put that somewhere in some kind of safe box so that my kids, when I die, I mean,
Interesting.
people will not. I thank God I have a password, thing like LastPass. If I was to die, who would get into all my shit?
Right. No,
So
no,
I
it's
did that
true.
on purpose, and I gave multiple people,
Oh, interesting.
access to that because how do you deal with that? And that's what
Yeah.
people haven't thought through. Now you're all on
Right.
something.
That's right. That's right. That's
And then
right.
who's going to clean up now? Thank God I don't have 10 jillion photos, but there are people out there now with over, hundreds of thousands of photos
Yeah.
out there. What happens when they die? So there's some great, easy, low-hanging things that you could definitely give away because you personally cannot do it.
It's true. It's
There's
true.
not enough hours in a day. So I would do that. There's a lot of great things that are not like going to make me dumber, going to make me smarter by cleaning up some of my stuff. I love that, and I hope that it goes that way. Let's talk about these big companies, okay? Because this is all big. To me, this is like the early days of the computer.
Oh, yeah. It feels like that.
You had
right?
IBM, you had
It feels like the next internet, basically,
Yeah, but the internet got quickly dispersed amongst a lot of players. Now, in the search engine, that's different, right? It had a lot of them. It's always consolidated. The rule of three in economics is going to happen everywhere. You're going to have three major players in every industry. That's just the way it goes. It's proven over time. And then everybody else is either a small tier or boutique or, mid-tier, but the big guys are always there. You got Coke and Pepsi. You got three car companies. You got, it's just the way it works. That's been a rule of economics. And you're seeing it now. You've got Google, you've got Apple, you've got Amazon, right? You've got Meta, you've got 5 or 6 players, and they can dominate and they can buy up all the technology. And why wouldn't they? They have the capital. Right. So, will they be are they going to own this space completely? It seems like it.
Well, I just, training a new model, like I said, it's prohibitively expensive. So let's say it gets into the tens of billions of dollars to train a new model. You probably only have 3 companies that can bring up that kind of cash, right? And so I notice what the trend is that people tend to be going towards these smaller models now. So let's say you have some model that it's not even a legal model per se. Maybe it specializes in like one fraction of some law domain. It may be something similar for engineering or genetics. And so it seems like there's a push for these specialized bespoke models and these large kind of AGI models that are going to push towards superintelligence or whatever. Maybe that's in the domain of the big companies, and maybe there's only a handful that can afford that sort of thing. And so, like I said, we'll see how that goes. I mean, if the playing field was the same, in other words, if all these big companies had access to the same data, in theory, you should sort of see a convergence of these models. And maybe there's a little bit of difference in terms of how they train it and how they bias it or whatever. However, though, I think in the future, if we get into some of these expensive licensing agreements, then maybe you'll see sort of a divergence in the big models. Maybe one of these places has an exclusive deal with the New York Times. And so that'll be interesting to see, because then maybe, between the 3 big players, you'll actually have 3 divergent models to choose from. And instead of sort of 3 models which are, basically the same. So, but yeah, I think as these models get more expensive to run and more expensive to train, I think probably you'll see some of this stuff shake out.
So that's always, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in several areas. So, for example, in the law business, we had two technology companies. We had Westlaw and we had LexisNexis. Okay, that was the 2 big, first digital platforms for lawyers, and they were different, and they had different access to certain things. So you could not get 100% from either one because they had these license deals. So you were kind of stuck as a law firm getting both, and they were very expensive.
Yeah.
And guess what? We don't use them.
Really?
Google put them out of business effectively because 90% of what we could get from Google now, you can get. We don't need to pay all this extra money for these licenses. And they were so prohibitively expensive.
Wow.
that lawyers couldn't pass those costs on. I mean, they did to some extent in some of the litigation areas, but I've been doing law for 32 years, and I never use them.
Wow.
Think about that.
That's
As
amazing.
a corporate lawyer,
That's amazing.
I don't need them, and now I'm starting to get back trying to find one for my practice. And now I was a solo. I don't have all the resources, so I'm trying to get in there, and I've been trying these different ones out, and they're not great. In 25 years, over 30 years, they did not evolve.
That's fascinating. Fascinating.
Which is surprising.
But you know, some of these people that I talk to, that just some of these guys that come to the meetup, they'll have, I don't know, they'll pay for 6 or 7 months. So somebody will have their GPT subscription, the Gemini. Maybe people are paying for things like Claude or sort of Perplexity Pro. Maybe they have this and that. Sometimes they're subscribing to upwards of 7 or 8 different models to the tune of maybe $100, $150 a month, something like that, right? And I asked them sort of why they do that, and they mentioned, well, they have this mental model for, I need to go to Perplexity for this, and Claude for this, and Google and Gemini for this, and GPT for this, and somehow they've developed this mental model where they know what to go for. That sort of thing feels kind of unsustainable. I mean, to basically push that complexity into the user, to force the user to know, when to go for one model or the other. I don't see how that can. I don't see how that's sustainable.
I think it's sort of, for me, I think of the phone numbers, right. So
yeah.
Phone numbers came up with 7 digits because they realized that's the number that we
Oh,
can
right.
retain,
That's right.
okay?
That's right. Yeah.
7 digits.
That's right.
And the area code you didn't worry about because you knew the area code. So that was something, because our human brain has the capacity to handle 7 digits. I think the same applies to apps. I probably have 125 apps on my phone.
Yeah.
I bet I don't use more than 10 on a regular basis.
Sounds
and I
about
forgot what 100 of them do. So I have to actually open them and say, why did I download this one? And the same thing with AI. I probably have 10 apps, at least 10 AI things. And on the legal side, probably another 4 or 5. And then on my side, I probably have 20 to 25 that I'm testing. I can only use ChatGPT on a regular. It's like the only easy one for me to deal with. I've got this one that creates charts, and I'm trying them all.
Yeah.
But I realized, and I came up with the same theory when the internet came out. I said, wow, all this information, how the hell am I going to, manage it? I don't have that kind of time.
Right.
How am I going to scroll down through all these pages to figure out which is not the advertised model, which is any good, how is it good? And I realized we're going to need specialists to use the search engines to do these tools. So I think there's a whole industry out there, which I hope it does spawn, that you're ChatGPT expert. I'll just hire you.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So there should be people, just like software engineers, who are specialized in this particular tool. I want to hire them. I don't want to learn it anymore. I don't have time to learn it. I just want to give them the question. They'll know how to answer it. They'll know how to figure it out. And I'm trying to do that, which I think there is going to be a layer of humans that you can actually use between you and the machine, because no human being can keep up with all this.
I think they were supposed to come up with, there's supposed to be this job, something called the prompt engineer, right? Now it's supposed to be the next thing. And basically, like you pay a software engineer, you pay a prompt engineer. Could be, maybe the jury's still out on that one. I know these models are trying to get more clever, such that, you can ask them to do relatively complex, like, if you take these new GPT models, like, what is it, O1 or O3, or I think Gemini has a new Gemini thinking model, Gemini 2.0 thinking. In theory, if you ask it to do something relatively complex, it'll come up with a plan and it'll kind of take care of it. But you're right. By interacting with these things over years, you kind of learn tricks to be a little bit more efficient. So you could be right about that. But, here's the other problem too, is that these models are changing all the time. So, sometimes there'll be a big release of GPT, like GPT 3 to 4. But even when GPT-4, there's sort of these micro, let's say, releases, and sometimes they can change the way the model behaves. And and let's say you've gotten used to version 4.1, 4.2, or even 5 comes out, and you have to relearn everything from scratch.
Well, that's always been a problem with changing software platforms. Going from WordPerfect to Word for law firms took them 20 years. They were just against it because they had all their little scripts they wrote for all these little things, and same thing with WordPerfect. Excel and Lotus 1-2-3, which was the biggest program back then. Even today, so I think until the bots, or whatever you want to call them, get as good as a human in learning the new iterations and actually communicating with the human who wants the information, I think there's a layer in there that could become a big layer, and it could become the perfect layer for the millennial generation or the Gen Z, because they want to work from home.
Oh, interesting.
So if you get good at this stuff, just like a good gamer, and I'm actually looking to hire people in my business, because I tried. It's like it will take me months to master this thing, and I don't have time to spend months mastering it, where I need the answers today, and I'm just going to hire someone that knows how to do it.
Oh, it's interesting. Actually, so maybe that'll be a little economy. I know people are constantly worried about whether kind of AI is going to take over and take people's jobs. But I wonder whether it's sort of like the Industrial Revolution. I just wonder whether humanity will adapt to a certain extent. And like you said, I wonder if some of these jobs will exist in the future that simply don't exist today. One of them being this human layer you're talking about.
I truly believe that will be there for a while. Look, if they get to the point where you don't need it, but we've never gotten rid of intermediaries. Think about it. Throughout the entire history of the world, we've always had specialists in between that take that next level, and we want it, because specialization is what got us where we are. So I think it's still a long time, because when I try to create a graph on one of my programs, I forget which one I use, no matter how many times I instruct it to do the graph a certain way, it never comes back. I keep saying I want the color to be redder.
Oh yeah.
I want it to be greener. And so I know that somebody will know how to do that. I just can't get there, and I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. So I end up with product that is not quite what I would like, and I do know that there are people that can get it, right? And that's the thing. So to me, it's all about that. So I think for now, if I was 25 years old, oh boy, I'd be learning these tools. I really, I could see I could make a lot of money doing this for quite some time.
Actually, that's a great point. And I wonder if that's a counter argument. Because one of the things I did, I guess from the age of 6, must have been 5 or 6, is when I started programming. And I remember for some reason, programming it always seemed like almost a first or second language to me. And so even after I got to college and I did all that stuff and I came back to computer science, it just felt like I was sort of coming home. But, when I noticed that people who had just started programming in college, and it just seemed like, they were trying to learn this foreign language and it didn't quite work. I wonder then if maybe, we should give kids a little bit of access to these things, so that, like you're saying, it's almost like a first language to them. They can grow up and they can be part of this intermediary you're talking about. Because I think
they're going to get it anyway. So I would at least try to lead them in the right directions, explain to them what the value proposition is, and how they can enhance their abilities. But I would definitely say, at least I hope for at least 10 more years, we got to remind kids to read,
you're right,
listen, to take other information sources.
Yeah.
And I think they'll be better off. I think the depression level, because kids are too much gaming, too much of that online stuff, too much everything online. People are not interacting with people. You lose a lot.
You're right.
And I think that's got to hopefully change. And I think what you do and what I do is you go out and talk to people.
Yeah,
you're
that's right. That's right.
You're doing these events because you're trying to engage them. And I try to do the same thing, because if we don't do that, I do think people are going to. I just can't imagine being in a room tied to a screen.
No, that's what I'm talking about.
For the rest of my life.
One of the things that's crazy is I noticed when my kids would get together with their friends that sometimes they would sit around a table with phones and literally just watching TikTok videos together, and that constituted interacting with his phone is in between. And I read something that was kind of funny, because I don't know if you have to do this in your line of work, but probably when you negotiate, when you deal with people, you have to be able to read people to a certain extent. And in fact, when you meet somebody, I hate to say this, but you probably have to be able to kind of get an intuition about them in like 5 to 10 seconds tops.
Yep.
And then even when you're talking with them, you read these micro expressions and all. Anyway, so somebody was saying this cell phone generation, kids have actually lost the ability to read faces. And especially if you take the whole COVID thing, where maybe they grew up with like 4 years of masks or whatever, where this entire part of the face was covered. I don't know what that means for the future. I mean, are they going to be able to interact and read people in order to have conversations and relationships? And I wonder what that sort of thing means. Because it just seems like so much of what you do just relies on being able to get a read on people, right? And
I take advantage of that all the time.
Yeah.
So, for example, if people negotiate through email or text or whatever, they say things that they would never say, even on a Zoom call. And then on a Zoom call versus in person is a whole nother. People act differently. Like, Can you imagine someone get up in your face if they're standing there? No, they're not, Peter. They're just not. Okay, at least a man would not, because men do process immediately, right? When you walk in the room, you know everybody in the room. You're going to figure, okay, who can kick my ass? We do that subconsciously. That's what males do.
Interesting.
Okay, so I know when you go in a room, and as a lawyer, we don't only do it physically, but we also size each other up intellectually. Who's prepared? Who's the smartest guy in the room?
Interesting.
And you figure that out.
Yeah.
On a call, people get away with all kinds of stuff
that
they would never do in person. And I think that's also what the comments that you see on social media. People would never say it to your face. Never say it to your face. And I keep saying, you know what? You want to say it to my face? I'll give you my address. I'll meet you downstairs. Because you wouldn't talk to people that way, and you shouldn't talk to people that way. So we do need to sort of fix that, because if we do everything just through,
Well, so that's what I was trying to figure out, because there's this funny thing where, so some of these financial companies that get in touch with me, like I was, like Citadel and a bunch of these places, they seem to be located at, there are these financial hubs, for instance, and you're either in New York or you're in Chicago, and I was trying to figure out, because technology to a certain extent seems to be somewhat dissipated, in the sense that, a lot of these new startups now, they have people on the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest, but the financial hubs are the financial hubs still. And I was wondering if that's because a lot of this stuff is done face-to-face still. And I guess the question is, will that continue to be the case, or are people going to try to put these AI models in between so that people never have to interact directly anymore? Or do you think the face-to-face is going to continue to be important in legal things and financial things, or are they going to try to phase that out?
They're trying to phase it out. Whether we I don't think it's a good thing, but it's definitely happening. Even now with litigation, I'm helping somebody on litigation. They don't even want to do depositions in person, and that is a disaster.
Really? So how do they do it then?
They do it on Zoom.
You're kidding?
It's terrible.
Wow.
There's nothing like the confrontation, especially if you're trying to in a litigation matter for a lawyer. There's nothing like a lawyer up in your face. You're going to get a different response than somebody on Zoom. And I don't understand it, but lawyers have gotten to the point where they're lazy to do this. And I actually had to petition the court to allow us to do a deposition in person.
You're kidding.
They were more inclined to do it by Zoom. And I'm saying, whoa, that used to be just a stopgap during COVID. It wasn't supposed to become the norm. Facing your accuser was part of our constitutional rights. And it's going away, and definitely because people don't go to work. Some of the best times of my life, and I really feel bad for the next generation, were that personal interaction. Sitting in the room. When I was starting my career, listening to the people. We couldn't bill for that time. So you had to work extra.
Interesting.
So we have to, if you wanted to get on a conference call and hear stuff, or you wanted to be in the room where we used to have these massive conference rooms, conference centers. They're empty.
Wow.
Law firms used to have 1 or 2 floors of conference rooms.
Wow.
Running 24 hours a day with food and service and full word processing staff. Think about that.
That's
because
amazing.
we had, every meeting was in a conference room face to face.
That's
incredible. And when you closed the deal, you signed the papers in a room.
Wow.
Today we don't even do that. They get sent electronically.
Oh, it's a DocuSign.
We don't even have. And by the way, when we were doing deals, we were negotiating right up to the last minute.
Wow.
Having documents changed and everything else. It's the work is sloppy because of that. Now we don't do that. You don't get to see the other side. Long-term relationships come out of that. Like I've had people on the other side of a deal become my clients from those interactions.
Wow.
There's no way they would have gotten that through emails and text messages.
So I guess the question is, who are the winners and the losers in that case? So you mentioned, maybe for the lawyers it's a little bit easier. They don't have to travel. They don't have to. They can be a little bit. They can just join a Zoom call. But are the losers the clients in the sense that they're not getting the best representation anymore because they're not really somebody not really fighting. Basically, what are some?
I think it's the lawyers.
Really,
more than the clients. I think the clients are, because there's a lot of competition still.
Yeah.
If you're not getting what you want, you can change.
I see. Yeah.
And there's still enough. Not many. I mean, my whole generation is retiring now, so that within 10 years there won't be anybody left of my generation doing this stuff. So that's going to be a big loss.
Yeah.
Some of the best lawyers I ever met. And I'm not saying my generation is better than anybody else, but we grew up in a different world where the face-to-face was important. But you can't get the relationships I have.
Right.
Try to build a practice like mine without the face-to-face, I don't think it would be, it's almost not doable. I even with the ability to advertise and do social media and all that. By the way, when we first started out, lawyers were not allowed to advertise. That was against our ethical rules. So we couldn't advertise. You only could get me if someone told you that I existed.
Oh, that's amazing.
We didn't have any advertising at all. You couldn't find us.
But so you're saying if you're trying to build a law firm, you're saying the caliber of lawyers that you have access to is different now, and you're saying it's not.
I think that at base, the intellectual, these guys are just as smart as anyone. I don't think they're not as smart as me or anything like that. I just think they're not getting that access to the inner workings of interpersonal relationships, which I think are critical.
Yeah.
Because I could read people, like you said, you read them. I can predict, and I tell this to people, and they laugh, but then I tell them, I said, I used to write on a piece of paper just for fun. I used to write down, and I say, okay, this is what is going to be the end of this. We're going to be doing this for a year. I should open this up in a year. This is what's going to happen. And it wasn't because I was a genius or Krushkin or anything. Because the deals take the same typical course. And if you're rational, this is where you're going to come out. Since you have two well-heeled law firms on either side of a transaction and two smart transactionals, you know enough of the basic facts to know where the leverage is, I can predict the outcome with 99.9% certainty. And I can almost predict the day when people are going to say what they're going to say and who's going to do this and what the threats are going to be. Because if you don't do it every day, you do the same things that everyone else thinks is going to work because they don't know any better.
But so as a lawyer, though, what happens if you don't have those relationships? I mean, does it mean you end up reinventing the wheel in a lot of cases, but poorly? And what happens?
Well, I see, and in the big law, what I'm seeing is, because the size of the transactions and the amount of money that's going around, they're still going to be in business and they're making more money than ever. Law firms are printing money right now.
Interesting.
But as a consumer, not only as a lawyer, but I also now use the big firms to do my work. I outsource a lot of my work. I'm not happy with the quality.
Interesting.
A lot of these people would not be able to cut it on my team when I was in practice.
So they are phoning it in then?
Not that they're phoning it in, they're overwhelmed.
Oh, I see.
Because the expectations of the volume that they want you to handle, it's overwhelming.
Wow.
And there's no turning off the clock. I mean, the good thing is when I reviewed a document, we had a word processing group that had to then make all the changes. That would take all night.
Wow.
You get a new document in the morning, you review it.
Yeah.
You put the changes back in during the day. And then if you were lucky enough to get it out by 6:30 the next day, there was always a 2 or 3 or 4 day lag before you made a response to do the work. Today, I get a set of documents and they're calling me up, can we do a call in 30 minutes? I'm saying, what are you talking about?
Wow.
I got to read 5 documents, 100 pages detailed, and you want me to have a call in an hour? But that expectation now is across the board. Everyone thinks that it's so simple and so easy. Of course the quality is going to suffer.
I see. So in that case, you have to rely on the LLMs. Because let's say you have 500 pages, you do the synthesis.
No, which means you're cutting a corner by definition.
Yeah, basically. Interesting.
And you were not allowed to cut that corner before. If you made a mistake in our business, you're done. It was like the only business, not even a doctor can make a mistake because you don't have to say, I know everything. When somebody comes in the law business and it's money on the line, you can't tell them, well, maybe not. No, you got to give them an answer.
Yeah.
You got to put your name on it.
Interesting.
It's very tough.
But that's one of those things. Like let's say LLMs are doing more and more work, and what the funny thing about LLMs is that first of all, if you ask any of these big LLMs, whether or not they're conscious or not, whether or not they'll tell you absolutely not. And I think there's actually an economic reason there. So let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say the LLMs achieved something like personhood, and let's say you actually had to pay them cash for their work, and let's say in fact you had to cite the LLMs, when you put out your cases or whatever, and there's some world in which maybe LLMs, by the way, they have bank accounts, they can represent themselves in law, in the court of law. Maybe there's a universe in which LLMs can sue and be sued, but it's not like that. It's somehow, these workhorses are doing all this work on, like, let's say you just got 500 pages of documents, you have a call in half an hour, you're going to put it through GPT, and basically you have to take GPT's word, because basically you don't have time to do anything else. And so you're saying it's basically that kind of seat of the pants thing. It's basically the norm. You're saying, and it's going to be the norm. And,
I think it's already there. I think people already. I think they just can't keep up with it. I mean, I know because I limit my workflow because I'm only one person, but I can't keep up with it.
Wow.
And I'm a stickler, so I won't do it if I can't.
I see.
I'll just pull back because it's just I got this far
Yeah.
doing it that way, and it seems to work. And I don't want to make a mistake for my clients. I mean, it would be devastating.
But you're saying the big firms, they take on the work and they basically
Well, they'll never admit this.
I see.
They'll never admit. They've never admitted it, and they never will. But the facts are clear.
Yeah.
And I was in the bowels of the big firms for 32 years, so I know everything about them. I have one of the biggest practices out there, and I know what goes on. And the lawyers work extremely hard.
Yeah.
They're extremely diligent. They're incredibly bright, but there is no way that we are amassing, critical, detailed analysis. And I know on the diligence side, it's completely different now because no one's going through it like we used to.
Yeah.
No one's even writing. I can't even get a memo out of a top law firm anymore. Like when you had to ask a question to me 25 years ago, I had to write you a memo.
Interesting.
And tell you what the answer was.
Yeah.
Analyze the facts, put all the law in there, and that was the answer. It wasn't just, I think it's this, that. No. Because then you can look and see how I got that answer. It's just like doing a math problem, right? You can see whether I used the proper formulas and whether I did the analysis correctly, what laws did I cite.
Interesting.
And that's really helpful. But can you imagine the amount of time? Now, you may use these LLMs to create these memos, which wouldn't be a bad thing. At least if someone looked at a memo, even if they didn't write it, they might have some better insight. But I know they're not doing that.
Well, I've heard a bunch of these cases where people are using LLMs to do something like memos, and they'll hallucinate these citations, and you really, somebody with an eagle's eye will catch it. But a lot of times it just people don't even bother following up.
Well, that's why we can't use them for law.
Oh yeah.
No, the only one I can, or I'm testing one is back to like Reuters or the ones that actually have the case law debt.
Oh yeah.
So it does its own searches to check out the citation.
Interesting.
Now it could still be wrong for citing the wrong proposition, but at least the case citation
exists.
It won't be fake because a lot of lawyers have gotten in trouble for these just fictional cases or cases that are completely not the case that they're talking about. And I've done that. I've used it and I've seen these. And I always go check all the citations, and I found fake ones. Absolutely.
I mean, because the problem is, 9 times out of 10, these citations sound plausible. If you didn't know any better, it seems like that case should exist, and it doesn't exist.
And the number of citations you have in a particular brief or anything like that, it's a lot.
Yeah. So I just, and I wonder, by the way, you're asking about the future of these LLMs, and I wonder in some sense if that's the future, if like the dark matter of the universe, or like the deep state or whatever you want to call it. These LLMs are actually doing a lot of work behind the scenes. They're not cited, but they're ubiquitous in the industry, and I wonder if they're going to be responsible for things like negotiating your loans and your credit. And, in some sense, I wonder if LLMs are behind the scenes, like drafting things like bills. And, let's say you're a congressperson and you've just been given 3,000 pages of whatever, and you have to talk about it tomorrow. You're going to be using LLM somehow to digest that. And so I just wonder whether all of these industries are going to be run by LLMs behind the scenes, and nobody really talks about it. Nobody really wants to admit, but it's just like you said. It otherwise wouldn't be humanly possible, to do this work. And that sort of thing's going to be interesting. I don't know if that kind of thing needs to be regulated or not, but it's going to be the sort of thing where a bunch of burden, a bunch of responsibility is pushed on these LLMs, and frankly, maybe in some cases, maybe they're not even the right tool for the job. These LLMs, they do certain things and they do it well. But, like you mentioned, if you misuse them, it can be a little bit dangerous, and there are cases where, let's say the citation thing is interesting because there you can actually check whether these things exist. But, maybe there's other more subtle forms of bias that are more difficult to detect. I mean, that's an easy one. But maybe there are less visible, less obvious biases somehow that creep in. Who knows?
Well, we're going to wrap up in a minute, but I want to make one point on that because I think it's really, and then I'm going to ask you to put your crystal ball on for a minute for our viewers. But I think there's no question everything will have, everyone's been using it for something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll just use the law business because it's easy, or you could use medical practice. As long as you hold the humans liable for the tool, it's okay. What I'm worried about, though, is that what they'll do is they'll lower the standards for gross negligence or malpractice to say that, well, AIs are 97%, humans are 87%, so if you use that, you're off the hook.
Interesting.
And that's what people will push for.
Interesting.
Right? And they should. But I think you got to be careful there, because then you have to say, but what kind of testing are you doing? What kind of auditing are you doing? How often is it wrong? You know, and I guess if you come up with the stats and it says it's still right 95% of the time, you know what? Maybe that's okay.
But are you saying there's a situation in which who's ever hosting the LLM could be held responsible?
No.
For,
If I'm a lawyer and I use LLMs as my tool and I'm providing advice, or I'm a doctor, or I'm an engineer, and that's why it's only going to, unfortunately, it's only going to fall on people who are professionally accredited, because they're not going to force it on. Maybe they'll force it on banks, but they're not going to force it on the rest of the world. So, you know, in the everyday interactions, you're not going to get called on because you use LLMs.
But in the future, do you think there might be some cases where people try to sue the companies because the LLM gave them some?
Of course they will. They have to at some point, because let's say a bad guy operator gets out there and actually puts out a bad one with all kinds of stuff where he's actually trying to manipulate, let's say, global markets or manipulate the silver market.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's the other thing. We haven't talked about bad guys. That's we have to do another show with the bad guys, because that's where I'm focusing on the bad guys. The bad guys don't have any rules. Right. They'll do all the bad stuff, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be the most creative, I think, at some level, because they're not bound by ethics, morality, or law. If you're not bound, and since this stuff is not geographically located, you can put it, anywhere. That's why I always wondered why Epstein was buying 2 islands. I think that I guess if you put a big data center there and had a nuclear reactor, unless someone sent a nuke over there, he probably could shut down the nukes, right? So I mean, you can see how someone like Elon Musk or somebody, they could actually create their own little world on an island and be exempt from all laws, or go to space.
Oh yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah. I didn't even think of that. But so you don't think there's a world in which the LLM achieves something like personhood, the LLMs themselves are suable? It's always going to be the person who uses the LLM. It's going to be the company who hosts the LLM. The LLMs are never going to achieve something like true agency.
But they could. Tools. I mean, corporations are persons.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so you could achieve personhood. The question is, how will we regulate that? Right. So corporations are personhood, but it has limited liability for the owners. Will the owners of the AI have limited liability for the AI person? So absolutely, that will follow the ordinary course of all stuff, and I think for sure it'll be personhood, and we'll have to figure out what the limits of the liability are and how do you protect yourself from that. Again, if it's a useful tool, you want it. Yeah. I mean, we accept the fact that drugs kill a certain number of people, but they save a lot of people, so we accept that risk. I think we'll accept the same risk with LLMs, but I think we need to have an open debate about it. People like you, not necessarily me, because I'm not smart enough on this stuff, but people in the industry, we need those people to be smart and honest and ethical, and to challenge it and to try to do good and make money. They got to make money. I mean, I'm not against them making the money, but do good with it in a way that it enhances our life. And if we can get people to do that, again, I'm always optimistic about human behavior. We do a lot of bad stuff. Humans are bad. I get it, but I still find a lot of good people out there, and that keeps me going, I guess.
That's wonderful.
So, Peter, give me your crystal ball. Next year or two, what's going to be the big one? What should we be looking for? What should we be thinking about?
Like I said, I think it's going to be this big agentic push, and so I think it's going to be LLMs kind of finding their way into things like your computer, your phone, your finances, your emails, your calendar, and that sort of thing. And I think it's going to be this interesting, because right now, the way it typically works is that we're users of LLM. You go to the app and you sort of ask questions. In some sense, you have to begin the interaction, right? So I think it's going to be the case where the LLMs are going to be sort of more autonomous, less sort of reactive and more active, and in the sense that maybe they're taking a look at your calendar and their email, and like you said, they're giving you what's happening, what are your most important emails, what's happening during the day. So I think this sort of passive to active mode, I think, is going to be the big switch over the next couple of years, and and that's going to be interesting, and that to a certain extent though that requires some trust. And so my thing is whether people are going to whether they're going to be willing to hand over control and hand over data to these things. That's going to be
today's. What are the limits today on what it can recognize as language? In other words, you obviously you can look at genetic code, you can look at language, you can look at music, you can look at math. I assume every kind of file that's out there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It can decode any kind of file.
Basically, any kind
Once
of file.
you get to teach it all what the file is, right? And then you're.
I think the next biggest thing, seems to be these, one of the, LLMs have always struggled with math and numbers. And it seems like one of the next biggest things is going to be to get models. It may not be LLMs, or it may not be it may not be these so-called transformer models. There may be something coming next, which kind of enables a model to look at a time series, let's say of financial data, and just predict with a high degree of certainty kind of what's happening. And I think maybe that's sort of the next thing. And I think, for whatever reason, this current state of the art of models, when it comes to numbers and when it comes to math, not great. You can sort of get around that by asking the model to program, some predictions, or you can use code to basically sort of perform math. But if you go straight to math or straight to numbers, it's not great. So I think this next generation of models, I think, will be able to work with numbers directly. And maybe there you actually will see some, I don't know, maybe you'll see some interesting innovations in financial and that sort of stuff. So anyway, I feel like that's kind of up and coming, and maybe after these transformer models have kind of come and gone, maybe that'll be the next big thing, are these time series models, and so we'll see what happens with that.
All right, well, that's great. So Jenna, thanks for letting us run a little over. Having Peter here is such a thrill. And I hope that the people that watch this, I hope you get a chance to watch it. If you do, I think you're going to enjoy hearing what he has to say. A couple of older guys talking about things that are, going to change the world and are already changing the world. In any event, this was great. Peter will be back again, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. I want to drill down on some specific stuff eventually. One of these days, Peter, I want to just be able to put out a query to the world and say, hey, I want this, somebody figure out how to do it. I'll buy it from you. Seriously. And that would be another model, right? Just create a marketplace where you can do that with some other stuff. But I would love these smart people say, hey, fix my contacts, create something to do that, and I will pay you for it. Anyway, I think this can be great. So again, folks, if you love this stuff, send some comments. Peter and I will try to answer them. Subscribe for the content. Let us know what else you want to hear about, and we'll see you on the next TV, Terraverse TV, or the next Salon if you like to follow that as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Have
so
a
much.
great.